Is it like part of the course or?
William, you good to? Alright, hi everybody. Welcome to the last session of the Summer Institute. We made it. We're really excited for this session. This is what do students know about robust teaching and learning. Today we have William Colucci here, assistant teaching professor at the Louisiana School of Business here at Montclair. So there is a sign-in sheet going around. When you receive it, just jot your name down for me. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to William Colucci.
Thanks for staying long enough to listen to the last episode here. Okay, so obviously I did a survey of my students, which is a typical thing to do. And the question basically is, what do the students know, if anything, about the best practices in terms of teaching and learning, but on their part learning? Do they know anything about the science of learning? What do they know? How much do they know? Does it have an impact? Does it have a relationship to anything? So going back to Socrates, knowledge, increase in knowledge is supposed to be related to outcomes. It makes your life better. It makes everyone else's life better. In this case, we have pedagogical knowledge. Is that knowledge, does that actually map out to anything? Is it related to anything that we care about, like grades? Is there any configuration that we should be looking for or that we should be aware of? Are there clusters of knowledge that are known? Are there, there could be combinations of ideas that are important, things like that. So this is, exploratory. Find out what's out there, make a map of what students know, and figure out if it makes any difference. So overall, there's lots of research in this area. This is an old standard questionnaire, and it's basically a compendium of many theories that were used in the past to evaluate or understand teaching and learning. And two of the most robust variables from this I use in my survey. Typically when I do analyses like this, I use them: task value and self-efficacy. So meta-analysis has said that those are the most robust indicators or most robust explanatory variables in terms of education. So I do include that in my analysis. And as you can see, there's a ton of ways of looking at this. I think what I did, may fit in here and there, but I'm not trying to systematically replicate this with my questions. I'm just telling you the theoretical context I'm going to use here. So, this is not my research, but someone else's research. Self-efficacy, sometimes, I see in the literature many times, something like self-efficacy becomes a moderating variable. So you'll have planning strategy and monitoring strategy. Those are kind of like, pedagogical knowledge. And in this case, previous research indicates that it does have a relationship to endogenous variables, but it also it is mediated through self-efficacy. So the more you know, the more you feel you can do stuff, and then the more you feel you can do stuff, the better the outcome. So, and that's pretty much what I found as well. So what do I have here? I'm going to start with descriptive statistics, just show you the replies to the questions, show you some correlations. Is it related to outcome? Endogenous variables in any way? Is it statistically significant? What is the amount of variance explained? Then I do a path analysis. Path analysis is basically regression. You start off with an analysis of the endogenous variable, in this case grades, and then you find out what's related to that. I'm using stepwise regression, so any variable that survives in turn can be explained by another analysis, and then so you can actually see what is associated with endogenous variables, and then in turn what explains the mediating variables. So finally I do a cluster analysis, and this is basically you can think of cluster analysis as using various attributes, in this case of students, to see if there's clusters or groups of students that have very similar attributes. And you just think about things like, taxonomies for animals, birds tend to have beaks instead of a mouth or a snout or something like that. And then, so you can make this broad categories like birds, predatory animals, mammals, etc. So it's sort of the same thing. So you're sort of exploring, looking for types of students out there. And we can always, when you're talking to your colleagues, frequently you'll say, well, that's that sort of person, that sort of student. You intuitively categorize yourself what types of students there are out there. And so this is an empirical way of actually, it's a way of empirically exploring that as well, or verifying that. Okay, so I ended up just surveying my classes, and it's 329. It's required survey. They get 25 extra credit points or something like that. Across 2 semesters, lots of different courses that I teach. 2 sections are junior level, the rest are freshman level. And all of them are, in the School of Business. I teach ethics as well as spreadsheets basically right now. What does the survey consist of? It consists of me going through my notes after reading and studying this stuff for many years, and then finding things that had robust research support. I want things that I want, like if a meta-analysis or something like that says, that's something that definitely we know supports student learning, I'll include it in my survey. And obviously you can agree or disagree with that, but that's basically what I did to identify 28 items that I thought that would be useful for students to know. And then the scale is 0, I haven't heard of this. 1, I don't use that strategy. 4, sometimes I do use that strategy. And 7, I always use that strategy. Okay. I do have some control variables, especially I have found in the past that the number of hours students work. I also include an item asking them for family obligations, because some students have that as well. And then I ask them how many courses they're taking, and I do an hourly calculation. So they tell me how many hours they work, family obligations, how many classes they take, and then I assume I'm going to multiply the number of classes by 3, and then that ends up being an overall a number that overall models what burdens they have, or what things are how many balls they have in the air. And the idea would be those that maybe have a lot of extra stuff outside of schoolwork are probably going to be strained, and they might do their outcome might be poor, the grades might be lower. And that's certainly the case. And obviously, freshman, sophomore, there could be a difference there. That could be an explanatory variable. I want to throw that in there and make sure I control for that. Gender I included, but it actually ended up not making any difference, so I won't mention that in the future. Okay, so let's do this. Let's figure out what you guys. See if you can do this. Go to polev.com, and I simply want you to think of anything that you think would help students, like a practice, a strategy, an idea for studying and learning that would help students. Anything that either you know of because of your reading or your intuition. But let's just mention one thing. If you see somebody else putting something in there, just go ahead and upvote their thing. You don't have to repeat it. And then we'll see what we have here as faculty. So it looks like collaboration is winning the day here. Think, pair, share. Authentic accession. And universal design, project-based learning. Okay. Good stuff. Maybe I'll include that in my next my next survey. Let me just discuss what I came up with. Obviously, you can disagree with some of this stuff, but I wouldn't put anything here that didn't have research behind it. These are culled from my particular experience reading through the research. That's all. So my introduction, I tell students what the survey is about. And then one of the first things, I'm just going to go through some of the research. And then, there is research that says if you simply force yourself to answer questions in the classroom, it keeps you more engaged, you actually learn more. And so what I did is I explained it, and then I gave it a nice little illustration there to make it a little bit more fun and informative, okay? So some research says if the student makes an effort to make the project meaningful in some way, that helps quite a bit, making it more relevant, does it have an impact in their life, so on and so forth. Cell phones are bad, we know that. So this one's about the research on that. Are they aware of that or not, and why are cell phones bad? Goal setting increases outcome, tons of research on that. One technique is to explain it simply to somebody. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't know yourself. That's the idea. And there's a lot of research on grit. Obviously there's people with more or less talent, more or less IQ, so on and so forth. But a lot of times, the person with more persistence and grit is actually going to do better than someone who might have, more natural, higher IQ. This is kind of counterintuitive. Instead of studying the same thing for 8 hours, straight until you do that, then move on to the second, and move on to the third thing, you actually should study 3 things at once. So you're switching from one to the next. Why? Because that actually wakes you up. In other words, if you sit on one topic in one category and you systematically go through it, your mind kind of goes to sleep because it knows what's going on and it stops paying attention. But if you start, actually you're going to study physics, then you're going to study physiology. That's much better than just studying physics, straight out and then physiology. You want to interleave it. Be comfortable making mistakes. Life is about making mistakes. People who have the attitude that mistakes are okay actually are better off. There are some things that students believe that are not true. For example, learning styles, research has no support for that at all. Most students actually think it does exist, and actually a lot of faculty think that it exists as well, but it's just not a thing. Multitasking is not a good thing. So a lot of people think they're multitasking. The fact is, psychologically, that's not how the brain works. So, many students believe that they are great multitaskers, and so the idea here is no, you're not. You're actually you're better off concentrating on one thing at a time. Writing things out by hand has actually been shown to help, to help learn. It helps keep engaged. It forces you to process. The amount of time it takes to write down something you can't write word for word, you've got to actually process it a little bit. Sleep is vital. That's when things sink in. If you don't sleep well, all your learning is going to be wasted. Most of your success is going to be if you build habits, not if you, force yourself to do something every day. It's got to be automatic, and there's some research supporting that. Exercise has actually been shown to increase learning outcomes. Many students think because they understand surface level ideas or concepts or facts about something that they understand in depth. And so that's something that students should be aware of. They should be aware of, okay, I think I know this stuff, but maybe I really don't. And then you should probably test yourself. Find a place to study. Maybe study with other people. maybe that motivates you. So take advantage of that. We are social animals. Pomodoro technique, you've probably heard about this. A quick discussion about IQ. IQ does get you there faster. You can do a lot more quicker, but research also says that people getting there quicker end up with a poorer product. They overlook a lot of details, overlook a lot of steps. So the idea is, IQ is important. Your natural intelligence is important, but it's not everything, and you can actually have an advantage, even if you don't have as much natural talent as other students. Testing, test yourself. Best way to learn. Brain dump retrieval, one of the most robust findings. I use this in all my classes. Well, actually the ethics classes. I don't have a purpose for it in my other classes. But what does it mean? You sit there and you, from memory, you write down everything you know about a topic. For example, last week's lecture on Aristotle. What do you know? And then basically, that forces your brain to work through it thoroughly, to create connections, and it actually results in long-term learning. If you don't do that, you're not going to remember it in the future. You're not going to have all those connections. And so, this is something I think everyone should be doing, because the research is so clear on this. Timing and placing. You can't just cram and study. I think we all know this intuitively. Basically, even if you get an A, you're not going to remember a lot in the future. It's not going to be very valuable. So you can't do it just once. You've got to do it again. And there's actually a science to this. How much you wait between study sessions and so on and so forth, all that's very, can be very important. What does not work well? The standard stuff that we think works well actually doesn't. Rereading, highlighting, rereading your notes. Basically the explanation for there is your brain is still asleep. You're not being challenged with something new, and so you're getting the idea that you superficially understand it, but you really don't. Okay. So, my analysis, the endogenous variables are grades. I also include the self-efficacy and task value for reasons I gave you. And then I have level here and the overall demands as controls. So what do I find? These are means, so it's a 0 to 7 scale. And here's, obviously you're not going to understand what these single words are, but here's the range of things. What can we do with this? Well, we're looking at this and we're finding out some of the most robust findings over here, brain dumps and things like that. The students know the least about that. The least number of students know about that. What they do know is, some of the common sense things. Taking a break. I mean, all students are into that, right? Or exercising. So this gives us some idea of what knowledge they have. Let's see. So this is actually an overall. I created some measures to get an overall sense of what they know in terms of the average of all those measures, or a count of all the measures that are greater than 0. And so if you do those summary measures, they will actually, there is a positive correlation and a statistically relevant association with grades. These are all of the correlations with, not all, but some of the pedagogical variables actually did, correlate, with outcomes. Then I did a path analysis. The first is, basically a regression that is modeling grades. And so the control variables are in there. as well as the pedagogical variables. And I use stepwise regression, so basically any of these variables that don't work out, they're not relevant for the model, they get kicked out, and you get a remaining set of variables that actually do help explain the outcome variable, right? So the outcome, the pedagogical items did not appear at this level at all. So what did appear is task value, which is TV, level, which is sophomore, junior, so on and so forth, and how many hours they work for pay. Now, the next level is, well, one thing we can model here is task value. So the next level here is we're going to model task value, and you know, if you do that stepwise regression, the only thing that survives is self-efficacy. So the last step is going to be how you explain self-efficacy. Now here's where we actually get some of the pedagogical, items that do appear. So it does seem like there is some explanation for students having confidence that they can do stuff because they have more knowledge. Okay, and so that would be the suggestion. The suggestion is if students have greater knowledge, more awareness, they're going to feel more confident, and that's going to lead to better outcomes. Eventually, it's going to lead to grades. So that provides some evidence that maybe student awareness of these things and training these things might actually lead to real-world better learning, or at least better grades. I'm not sure they're necessarily the same thing, but okay. And so this is basically the interpretation. Knowledge leads to self-efficacy, which leads to task value. Task value in turn explains performance of grade, and here are the controls. Then I did a cluster analysis. The way to think about a cluster analysis is kind of exploratory. You're taking a number of variables and you're saying you want the statistical program to actually find ways, and you choose how many clusters you want, and you can experiment with that. Try 3 clusters, try 4 clusters, etc. And it'll go in there and try and find or try to categorize people together that seem to have the same attributes. They're not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to kind of force people into clusters. And then once you do that, you get an idea, like you said, there's some we all have categories in our mind for students, and this sort of is sort of the same thing. There are like types of students out there, and if you actually do the ANOVA on these, the clusters actually are statistically significant. So in part, it's a creative process. I can choose 3 clusters, 4 or 5, whatever. But I can verify it with ANOVAs after those clusters are created. So how do you interpret this? Basically, red, you think red bad, green good, right? So there's the first group here, which is group 3, cluster 3. Basically, lowest grades here, and they have lowest self-efficacy, the lowest knowledge, except for these 2 items, which is a little bit different. But otherwise, everything is pretty low there. Then the second group, higher grades, the huge difference in obligations. This group might be hampered by tremendous obligations they have. This first group has a bad attitude, and on top of that, they have no obligations. They have no excuses, and they basically don't want to be in school. And I've done this many semesters, and it's the same thing. There's a cluster of students who really don't want to be there. Then there's students over here, very little obligations. They get better grades, a fair amount of knowledge, very high self-efficacy, and then finally the group with the highest grades, they have moderate obligations and higher knowledge. Okay, so this is, again, it's something to think about. It's food for thought, and you can actually come up with, again, different clusters and different variables for the clusters. It's sort of a creative process, but I think it's useful. I did also ask a question at the end: did you find this valuable? How likely are you to try some of these techniques mentioned above? that you were not aware of or didn't understand well. I got a mean of 5.17, which means this sort of suggests that they found taking the survey useful. And here are some comments. A lot of them volunteered that they learned from it, or they enjoyed it, or they thought it was valuable. I also asked them to add, is there anything that I didn't mention that you use that you find useful? And I did get some responses there. One student, I've heard students do this in the past. They tell me that they watch YouTube videos on topics because apparently that my lectures aren't good enough. I think that's an interesting idea. In other words, getting the same thing explained, or having different explanations or modes of explanation for the same thing might be a good idea. And then this one student, students don't seem to read. I don't know if you've seen that article about even elite schools that can't make students read a whole book anymore. They got upset, about that. And so the one student mentioned that, you actually need to sit down and habituate yourself to read. So it's something that like we probably wouldn't intuitively understand, but I think that these are challenges that current students have. And then one student, I thought I don't know if it's serious or not, but she has a doodling method, which I don't know. I just thought it was funny. I am curious if it might be related to something for some reason. All right, that's pretty much what I have. What I would like, if anyone has any ideas on what works for you, what could be included on a future survey, what kind of maybe analysis that you would be helpful, so if you have any ideas, I wouldn't mind hearing what you have to say.
I wouldn't, you kind of dismissed the doodling method, but that is something I do, and I think it's good because what it does is to make your doodle, you have to think and process what you're thinking about. So I don't think they're not randomly doodling. I think they're doodling something
on topic.
On the topic.
Oh, okay. That clarifies it a little bit. Yeah. Well, actually, I sometimes I end up being able to concentrate more in a noisy place. Oddly enough, there are some counterintuitive things, especially going through the research, like the interleaving part and the brain dump part, and studying different topics, not studying it all at once, and the timing. All these things, like I don't think they're very intuitive, and they're actually almost counterintuitive. People believe that you should concentrate on one thing at a time, and so on and so forth. And to me, we should identify, let's say, 5 of the most robust pieces of pedagogical knowledge, do an experiment, train one group with those ideas, and see if it improves their performance, and see if it helps. I think that would be a worthwhile study. What I'm hoping to get at is what's the low-hanging fruit. Once I identify the things that students don't know about, and that are most important for them to know about, integrate that into my class, start training in those ideas, and then follow up throughout the semester. For example, in my ethics class, I actually do a brain dump, and I explain why I'm doing a brain dump at the beginning of every class. And I've gotten voluntary comments saying that actually has helped. And they're kind of confused. They're like, why are we doing this? They want to look at their notes and everything else. No, that's not the purpose of it. But I have gotten spontaneous feedback, at least on that. Go.
Yeah. So first question is that it's not a good idea to give students 3 tasks. Just give them 1. You said students should focus on 1 task. It's better. 1 time, 1 task, instead of give them 3 tasks and so they can review. My first question is that teachers should not give them a lot, just give them 1.
Yeah, yeah.
One task.
Well, I mean, there's research. I think it's called interleaving. What you would do is, so let's say there's 1, 2, 3 tasks to do that thing. Then there's 1, 2, 3 tasks to do something else. If you want them to actually study and remember that, they should actually jump back and forth between the topics and not go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, what you're saying is don't give them a lot because that's going to overwhelm them. Just give them one at a time. Agreed. I saw a presentation earlier where a teacher was using a spreadsheet and forcing students to go step by step through the project, which I thought, because I get that. I have found a long time ago, if I give them too many instructions, they just don't read it and they don't follow it. And, you know, so.
So thank you for the answer. Another question is, you said a review, students just review, they cannot put a lot of things in the long-term memory. So what are the things, what do teachers should do, keep them to transfer the knowledge to the long-term memory?
You know, I suggest to students, I don't know if they do it, I say, don't study by sitting there and then reviewing your notes. Sit down and say, okay, what do I know about that topic, and write it out. And then the second thing, I say to them, okay, now look at your notes and find out where the gaps are, and think to yourself, why are those gaps there? And now make sure you understand, you know, that material, and then revisit a few days later. Do another brain dump and see if it becomes, it collates like that. So that actually forces, basically the research says no pain, no gain. If you're making it easy on yourself, intellectually, you know, cognitively, etc., the brain isn't going to change too much. The more stress you put on your brain, the more you make it difficult for it, the more it gets excited, starts making connections, and then integrates all the knowledge into long-term memory. So a lot of the stuff the students do, they do it because it makes it easier for them. That's the worst thing, actually, in terms of learning. It's fine maybe for getting a grade in a class because you can get the A through cramming or something like that. But we've all had the circumstance where a student walks into the course and they're supposed to know something, and they just, because I teach a course in the freshman level, and then I have people saying, my students don't know Microsoft Excel when they get to the junior, my class in the junior. I mean, it's tough. It's tough. Long-term memory is a struggle.
With different styles of note taking, I was thinking of this with the doodling because there are structured approaches like the Cornell notes and ways of doing like double sign notes, double column notes that make it easier for you to review the notes later and also give you a little bit more of a challenge, like you're saying, like you can ask yourself questions off of them.
Absolutely. I think there's research on that. I think it confirms that. Yeah, I do. I have introduced that to students in the past, and I actually you can actually print those things out and hand them out. So the one side is blank, and the other side has little lines on it. And I also just tell them to do that with a piece of paper. Well, I haven't done an experiment.
Have they actually? Because I found my students actually don't sort of know what they should be taking notes on sometimes, and they don't have a regular formula for themselves. I feel like even just having a regular way of doing it is
okay.
Not,
so,
like you're not at that stage.
So maybe they need training in how to take notes.
Yeah, I was just interested in whether that was.
Well, I'm pretty sure I read research about the Cornell, I forget what it's called. Yeah, that does actually, and I use that in graduate school, so I can tell you stories about it. But I think it's better. It's just interesting that, like, I don't know your experience, but no one gave me training before I started teaching. It was like, hey, you want to teach this course? Sure. That's it, no training. Students, I don't think get any training in how to be students.
Like, I don't know whether people get this in high school. I feel like in high school classes, I was told what notes to take. Like I was often told by the teacher, take your notes this way, like do it this way. And some people used kind of like a, you know, some kind of a scheme for it, or they told you to use numbers or letters to make an outline of your notes. Like that was active training that used to be given maybe in, I mean, I went to a New Jersey public high school, so that used to maybe be more common. But what I've found with my students in a college classroom is I'll literally just kind of stand there and be like, you probably should be taking notes during this class. And I'm looking like, oh, can you use some paper? You know, like it's not automatic, you know, by any stretch. And these are like, they're not necessarily freshmen. I mean, they have sort of been told that they can skip over the notes part and either outline their text, or they can remember stuff, or they can, you know, like, they've got a lot of...
Well, in part that goes to the illusion that because I know it now, I'm going to remember it next week. And so they think it's fresh in their head, they think, I'm getting it, I'm getting it, and they're really not.
But I'm not saying that like a particular style of taking notes is good, but I think just that idea
Just doing those.
of putting, like putting something down on your thinking of it.
Well, yeah, especially writing it down manually. There's a lot to be
Consistent
done with that.
way, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Not just like-
honestly, I'm not aware of how you should be doing it. Maybe I should get to that, exactly how you should be taking notes on it.
It would be interesting to know what the different styles that results in.
It's got some use for that.
Sort of conflicting ideas a little bit, and for me the idea of interweaving, which sounds really interesting, seems to conflict with the idea of don't multitask. So I was wondering if you could just help me understand how you
Well, multitasking is doing simultaneously. In other words, you have your phone there, and you have the TV on over there, and you have, that's multitasking, that's bad. Interleaving is, I'm going to study that for an hour, then I'm going to study physics for an hour, now I'm going to switch over to literature. And now I'm going to, so basically it forces you to topic. So your brain now has to completely recalibrate and say, okay, where was I? Where did I leave off? That reconstructs everything in your brain all over again. Forces your brain to do a lot of work. Reinforces everything you just learned. Because, once you go from one topic to the next, you have to reconstitute the entire context. It sounds bad because it makes you do a lot of work, but actually the work is what's helping you.
And do you know that when you're lecturing, do you try to model interweaving or structure your class and your students to have interweaving happen, or is that something you leave for them to do outside?
I really think that as a study thing in terms of the class, what I do in the class is I really don't. I like to do things in class like projects and in group things, so I don't have enough time to actually do part of a lecture on this and then part of a lecture on that. So I haven't tried. All right, let's go enjoy the day. Thanks for coming.